Hello. Um,
Hello.
how do I even, okay, let's start. How do I even pronounce your first name? Just to make sure I've got it right.
It's Anja, but you can pronounce it whatever way. Like people call me Anja, all sorts of things. So whatever feels
Okay,
easiest.
Anya, it's easy. So just to give some background, we've been trying to line up a call for the last couple, I think the last couple of months. Was it in the start of, was it December or was it start of January? I can't remember.
I don't even remember, but it feels like forever.
It feels like a long time, exactly.
It feels
Uh,
like everything around us had to align so we can meet today.
Yeah, for sure. I had to wait for the retrogrades to finish, Venus and Mercury, and then you had spicy flu.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, just thank you. I'm just gonna do a little bit of like upfront stuff. Thank you for, you know, making time. Uh, we don't know each other. So
First time we see each other.
this is about just connecting with, I think it's just more about the energy match. So I'm very curious to learn more about you and what you do. I think from the things that I've read and seen, super interesting, like very topics that I'm interested in, but I guess not many people are talking about. So maybe we'll start with introduce yourself and maybe a little bit of what you do, just as a bit of introduction, and then we'll go into some details.
Okay, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm also happy that we finally made it. I was just thinking like how we even got to know each other online, and I think I just found your profile. I don't know if you put on some ads for some offerings of yourself or something. I don't really remember, but I also remember that I went to your profile and I was like, wow, really interesting topic. So I also feel like the resonance of the topics that we share. So
Okay.
thank you so much for inviting me today. And yeah, to my person, a little bit about what I do. It's always a little bit hard to describe what I'm doing because I feel there's so many different aspects and layers. If I would have to find one term for myself, which I don't really like, I don't like to give myself any kind of labels and stuff. But if I would have to find a term of what I'm doing, I would call myself a transformation guide. So what I do is I guide people into trance-like states, and that can look in very different ways. Like I'm facilitating sound baths. I'm mostly working with gongs. I'm a gong master, and so I am guiding people into trance-like states where they get to connect to their essence and to like some sort of higher self. And what I also do is I guide people through a journey called timeline jumping, which is a process where I guide people to kind of dissolve their current vibrational inertia around themselves and then guide them into visualization where they also can connect to either a future self of them, a self that lives kind of like in a parallel universe, or just their essence, their core essence. And then I teach them to bring basically the potentials that they encounter there into their current reality. So that is the timeline jumping. And my own experiences brought me to a point where I wanted to go deeper into the topics of death. So I would kind of call myself something like a death positive advocate. And I started to, that is something that I just do from time to time. I offer workshops where I teach people to prepare for a better death, to just encourage them to talk about their own death, to prepare like ways on how we can prepare our own death. And yeah, sometimes people look at me in a very confused way, like, okay, so many different areas, they don't have anything to do with each other. But for me, it is basically everything the same. It is all based on death and rebirth. Like in my sound baths, the most important thing that people believe is the sounds and the vibrations. But in essence, like, what is the sounds and the vibrations without the silence? So it is the silence where all the magic happens, where we get to integrate what we experienced where we integrate like all the energy that we kind of experienced in another dimension and bring it down into our current state of reality. And so it's the same in the timeline jumping. I guide people to a place where they get to dissolve their old being. It's like a death, a shedding of old layers, and moving into a new self. And so, yeah, the death positive thing, it's of course also the same. It's a reflection of death and rebirth of life. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. So many juicy topics and like, yeah, very yeah, so many places to start. Before we jump into I guess the juicy bits, I guess that's more about, what you offer to people. Tell me a little bit about your background. Like, where are you from? I think currently you're based in Bali.
Bali.
But tell me a little bit about your upbringing, because I think the people I like to speak to are, yeah, like people, like, I guess it doesn't necessarily need to be young, but people that are exploring things for themselves and just trying to figure out like spirituality, connection, consciousness in today's modern age. And we've got so much access to information, which is a little bit different from how it used to work, in terms of like maybe a bit more structured, organized religions. There was more of a, this is what it is, and this is our approach, or this is our path. Yeah, I'm curious to hear where you like, grew up, what the influence were, and then when you kind of started to get interested in it. In this world.
So, yeah, I'm from Austria. I grew up in the countryside in a very, let's say, boring village where nothing ever happens. So basically what happens there is people go to school and then they kind of flock into bigger cities to do their studies or explore their path of life. It's not many young people staying in this area. And so for me it was the same. After school I went to Vienna and started my journey of exploring many different studies. I had so many different interests, so for me it was always hard to narrow it down to what I really want to do. So for me it was always like, I visited some sorts of studies, just a few topics that I wanted to integrate for myself. And where I ended up was finishing my studies in multimedia arts, because I was also very interested in all sorts of arts, contemporary art. I was focused on mostly animation.
Cool.
Like 2D and 3D animations.
Nice.
So I finished the study and it was a lot of fun doing this work. I got like a classic 8-to-5 job. But to be honest, it never was really satisfying for me. So I also made myself, like I also got self-employed, started my own business in this kind of area. But then I always had the feeling, this is not the only thing I want to do. It was a lot of fun for me going into the process of creation, but there was also this longing that I want to give people something on a more subtle level. So at this point in my life, I wanted to go traveling to just explore more about myself and about how I can get to the point of knowing what it is that I want to give to people and how I want to give it to people. So I went to a 1.5 year travel journey, and it classically brought me to India, where the classic part, where I did the yoga teacher training. And I just did it for myself. I never really wanted to teach. I knew that it will bring me some sort of inspiration. And so that was really the point where I started to change some views on life. I started to change like how I view myself, my internal, and also my external. And it also brought me some inspiration on where my path will lead further. It also brought me inspiration on sounds. It was also connected with Nada yoga, which is the yoga for sound. And so when I came back from my journey, from my travels, I wanted to integrate that. I wanted to offer that for myself. So I started all sorts of educations around sound healing. I did a gongmaster training. I traveled to New York to study with one of the teachers that I really admired, Don Conrio. It's a really fascinating figure that teaches Gong yoga.
Beautiful.
And so, yeah, that kind of was the point where I started living, living my spiritual side more. I always was also fascinated by these topics. I always was fascinated by self-development topics, by spirituality. But that was really the point where I started to live it. And yeah, if I go back in time, I came also from a very religious family. I grew up in a Catholic family. In my childhood, I remember I was being forced, my sister and me, we were being forced to go to church like every Sunday. And in a time like during youth, that's something very difficult to do because we wanted to explore different sides of life, you know?
Sure.
And so we always kind of rejected those kind of topics, the religious topics. And for me, it was always a little bit intertwined with spiritual topics. So that for a long time, I was kind of rejecting it.
Yeah, definitely.
And so, yeah, the whole journey through doing my own yoga teacher training brought me more into exploring on a deeper level. And yeah,
Beautiful.
that's how it all unfolded, kind of.
Yeah, nice. And when was that trip to India? How long ago?
Let me think. I think it was in 2017. Yeah,
Okay.
2017. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, the last couple
Yeah.
of years have been a bit of a blur. It's hard to factor it
Yeah, and also the journey, like my travels, it was so much stuff happening, so I can never really recreate the timeline of when what happened. But yeah,
Doesn't really matter, does it?
no,
The time
you
does.
you you also were in India, right? Like your journey also brought you to India.
Yeah. So yeah, I was in India 2 years ago, and that was at the start of the pandemic. So without going into too much of my life story, yeah, I went there for yoga teacher training, and I was meant to do a 4-week course and then go to Nepal and do some trekking. And I think I've always wanted to have like a pilgrimage. It's the romanticized view of going somewhere and having this, you know, this awakening experience and meeting some guru or someone that could kind of show me something that I didn't see. It's like the movies. And I think, yeah, I guess I was forming my perspective about spirituality even before that. Um, yeah, just really quickly, because we might as well share, but I my grandparents were Buddhist, and they had were working with a temple I'm in Sydney, Australia. And I actually went to a Catholic high school because that's where my friends were going. That's the only reason I wanted to go, because all my primary school friends were going there. So I was like, Mom, Dad, can I go there? Because I want to, hang out with them. And yeah, so I had an experience of Catholicism, 6 years, high school years. And it was interesting because, I enjoyed it as an outsider. I wasn't born into it, and I didn't, so I think from like a little bit more of an adolescent age, I could see, oh, there's some guidelines for life. There's, community, there's a sense of support. Obviously some of the rules and the kind of, I guess the structures were quite rigid. But at the same time, I could see that, it was, I think the intention was to be supportive. Anyway, that's how my experience of it was. And even at that school, we learned about Aboriginal spirituality. We learned about Judaism. Like, they were able to talk about many different religions in school. So it didn't feel too fundamentalist or, too, strict. Um, Yeah, I think similar to you, I kind of took the path of creativity. So painting, music, like playing drums, and yeah, that you know, that itself is a bit of, it's a connection to spirit in terms of flow state, in terms of like intuition, and yeah, being a co-creator, like creating something from scratch. And you know, I think that was when I started to dialogue with my subconscious mind or intuition to say, you know, what do I want to do with this blank canvas? Where do I want to go? You know, a bit more here, a bit less there, a bit lighter here, a bit heavier there. So it was a very gestural, very intuitive kind of art practice. And you know, now they talk about art therapy, and I think back then I was just doing it because I just wanted to like paint and create. But yeah, it's very interesting how there's like kind of more contemporary modalities that, you know, talk about, yeah, art as a form of healing and also expression and basically inner child, connecting back with that curious, like childlike mind. So I probably did that for like 10 years. So like, you know, doing exhibitions, solo shows, had some in Sydney, Melbourne, went to London, had a show there. So that was kind of what I was interested in. And at the same time, I was doing graphic design. So, and at the same time, I was partying. So I was kind of like really enjoying like quite a hedonistic lifestyle. I was born in Sydney, so it's a very city lifestyle. And that's what I knew. You know, my group of friends, it's like clubbing, music festivals. So it was very, I think, very grounded in, yeah, just society and culture and those kind of values. And I guess when I was in London, that's when things started to break down. I think it got too intense. I lived in London for 4 years, and you know, traveling around Europe, just experiencing, yeah, just experiencing what life was like over there. But it kind of broke me because I think I got a bit too self-destructive, and eventually I made my way home, and I was depressed, I was broken, my body was falling apart. And I think that's when I was like, I need help. I need some type of therapy. I need some type of, yeah, I'm not in a good mental place, and that's reflecting on my emotional state, my physical state, my energetic state, all of it, all the bodies. And I didn't want to turn to, you know, traditional psychology or, you know, medicine in that way. I didn't want to take pills or anything like that. So that's when my story started in terms of, you know, I went to a Buddhist retreat. I started like reading about meditation, self-help books, lots of YouTube. And yeah, I guess that was probably now about 6 or 7 years ago, of just, again, just figuring it out. Lots of different modalities. So yeah, I guess that's a little bit about how I got here. So maybe now you know, I want to jump into some juicy bits now that we've kind of got the introductions out of the way. Let's start with um, the Gong stuff. I think there's three things that I'd like to like talk about today, but you know, it's very organic. We can go wherever we want with this. There's no rules, but it seems like, you know, the sound healing, the timeline jumping, and then the yeah,
The death part.
death advocate. Is it positive? Death positive.
Yeah, death
Death positive.
positive.
Yeah, let's leave that last because I think that one's yeah.
The most interesting.
No, they're all interesting. Like, you know, they're all interesting in the same right, but yeah,
It's just something that is like a taboo and that people don't often talk about it. So it can also be something that people most often want to hear the most.
yeah, I think in Western society, it's something, and particularly talking about the pandemic, you know, it's really what people's relationship is with fear and with death. And you know, one of the first things I did was when I went to that Buddhist retreat, they were saying we need to talk about death more because, you know, reincarnation, you know, samsara, you know, there's all these different concepts in that world where they said the more we talk about it, the more we can normalize that. But anyway, let's not jump there. I feel like
Let's skip it.
It's a very society-based thing. Let's start with sound healing, gongmaster. Tell me about that practice and tell me about, you know, how that feels like for you, what you experience, and yeah, just any insights on that modality.
Mm. So it was very interesting to start this practice because first and foremost, it was a journey into my own healing. Through By the time I started, I didn't know exactly what I'm doing, what happened, like when I'm, when you're going into this trance-like state. I didn't know anything about that, but I felt like the impact it had onto my body, onto my emotional well-being. Yeah, by that time, my life, it felt very unsatisfying, and I felt kind of lost. I didn't know exactly what to do, where I want to go. I just felt this inner frustration that I couldn't get out of it. And so when I started the Gong training, literally my life changed upside down in such a short time. And by the time I did it, I still didn't know really what happened. But later I realized that by stepping into this trance-like states, of course, I'm changing a lot of my belief system about how I view myself, about how I view the world, about, yeah, a lot about, the subconscious stuff, the stuff that really sits like deep into the layers of our mind, into our being. And so, yeah, it really had a great impact onto myself. I even remember, like, before I did my trainings, I remember the first time that I went into a Gong bath, and I didn't know exactly what I should expect from that. Like, one of my teachers by that time, one of my yoga teachers, she invited me because she invited a gongmaster. And so I attended this, and I remember getting into this deep trance-like state that really transformed into a psychedelic experience. I remember having such intense visions. I didn't really know that this is possible to access, like, without any psychedelic induction. And so I was super confused after that. I was like, what even is possible if we can enter into the states without having any external substance? What even is possible? Where can we travel? And so I was super inspired by the effects and also what it did to myself. I felt very calm. I felt very centered. And I just remember getting out and having the thought, okay, I need to give this opportunity to people. I want everyone to experience this. Like, we're sometimes so stuck in our everyday life, we're constantly seeking for more, and we're constantly seeking for those kind of experiences that give us these highs, because sometimes we can be so numb in our life by just doing the same things that we are taught that we have to do. And so it felt like breaking out of all these fixed structures of my life that has been given to me. And so I felt I want everyone to experience this. I want everyone to know that you can do this all by yourself. You don't need anything from the external. You can have those kind of highs in every kind of situation. And so, yeah, that was kind of the path that brought me to then doing the sound healing itself. And I love facilitating these journeys because I always see the transformation within people in such a short time, like within one gong bath. Like, I had people coming, they were like, what is this even, like women bringing their boyfriends to like a gong bath. They didn't even want to go. They were not diving into any kind of topic around like spirituality or self-development. And so within 1 hour, they transformed so much within themselves. They went out like fully in peace with themselves and like being super inspired to, yeah, go more into reflection of what they want in their life. Because essentially what it is when you go into a gong bath is that you kind of connect to your core essence. And there's so much stuff that can happen during a gong bath, like realizations, visions, and inspirations that you can get for your own life. And yeah, I just love that it happens instantaneously. It's like this, yeah, this immersion into potentials and possibilities. Yeah.
What kind of instruments do you use?
Mm. I use many different things, but mostly I focus on the gongs. I
Okay.
just love them so much, but I also use crystal bowls, Tibetan singing bowls,
Mm,
some more subtler stuff like, I don't know if you know the koshis, and some sorts of bells,
right.
rattles. I also started in Europe, I started playing the harmonium and handpan. Like,
Uh,
by the time I wanted to try everything, but yeah, when I went to Bali, I had to decide what I bring with me.
yeah, it's
And
not
so,
quite
yeah, I already feel like I was traveling with my whole orchestra.
sure.
So I didn't bring the handpan, I didn't bring the harmonium, but I brought my gong, and it was a tough journey
Yeah, wow.
to.
How big is the gong?
It's like 80 centimeters, and it weighs like 15 kilograms.
Wow, okay.
People at the customs were like, what is this? What is she doing?
Yeah,
But I never regretted it. Like, honestly, like from the moment I started taking the first mallets into my hand, it felt like I'm growing another limb.
mm,
Like, the gong really feels like a part of me.
yeah,
It's I've been traveling last year in Portugal, and I didn't bring the gong, and I felt that something was missing, that some part of my rituals, my practices, something essential is missing. So I decided to bring it to Bali, and I never regretted it since then. It's a very important part of my, not only that I want to give this to people, but a very important part of my own sadhana.
yeah,
And
your
yeah,
own self-practice.
yeah.
Incredible. Yeah, it must be such a reset.
Hmm.
Kind of
Yeah.
bring you back. I think for different people, it might be meditation, it might be asana, it might be breath work. But yeah, like when I was where did you do your yoga training?
In Goa.
Ah, Goa. Okay, cool.
Yeah, it was facilitated by a friend of mine that was already teaching in Austria, and she was working with different other teachers from Canada and also from India. So it was like this co-creation of teacher
Ah,
training, yeah, with different influences. Where did you do yours? Rishikesh?
yeah, I did it in Rishikesh, and yeah, I think at the start, so I think I told you half the story, but I went there for 4 weeks, and then I was meant to get to Nepal, but halfway through our yoga teacher training, lockdown happened in India. So
Ah, you were also there during
yeah,
the
it was meant to
lockdown.
be 6 weeks, but it turned into 10 months, which was
You
incredible.
were there
Yeah,
all month?
couldn't get
Oh
home.
wow.
I couldn't get back. So you know, India was on like strict lockdown. So yeah, we stayed. Yeah, I stayed there, and people in the school stayed there. Some people went back home, but I couldn't get back to Australia. Like literally couldn't get back to Australia. It was really difficult until December. So I got there in February, got home in December. It was a beautiful year. That was 2020. But I learned so much. I think while I was there, I was able to indulge in like 2 yoga teacher trainings. I did a Reiki course, and I did a sound healing course as well. It's just a short one with Tibetan bowls. Um, but that's why I was curious, because there was so many different like styles. Uh, but yeah, I was surprised as well how somatic it can be, like
Mm,
how vibration can move the body, and how that frequency can just start to like almost like hone in onto the blockages or the discord, and then start to vibrate it, and then you have to move. Like you have to
yeah.
move it out. It's I'm sure that you've seen some amazing things during
Yeah, I've that very often, that people suddenly, have to just pull in the knees or get up and shake and stuff like that. Yeah,
Yeah, tell me
it's
a little
really.
bit more about what I don't know, yeah, obviously confidentiality, like, in limits, but what's the spectrum of the things? Obviously people go there lying down, and then
Yeah.
what's some things that you've seen, just to, I guess, for people that haven't encountered a sound bath or gong bath before. Yeah, what 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 can happen physically?
So physically, yeah, I just wanted to say, like, there is different aspects to it, of course. It can be physically, but also the mental part, like the spiritual part, which I find even more interesting. But physically, the most interesting thing that I had was a person, like, she consulted me even before she came, because she had a tinnitus,
Oh wow, yeah.
and it was very bad for like a few years already. And so she didn't know if it was like good for her to come or not. And so you never know what happens, and you cannot say that something is good for every person. So I just suggested her she comes, and if she enjoys it, she should just stay.
Yeah.
And if she doesn't enjoy it, she just goes out. So she came, and she totally dropped into the deepest state right away. And after the sound bath, she came to me, and she was like such full of gratitude. She said she was working with so many different modalities and trying to ease the sound of it a little bit, because it was influencing her everyday life. And so she said in this sound bath, for the first time in her life, for the first time that since she had this condition, she was able to silence it a little bit. It wasn't, of course, completely gone, but it brought her some inner peace and a moment where she could finally relax again, and could finally also just, use this moment for herself. So that was like a really interesting moment that also revealed for myself again, like what is possible. And so mentally, I had all sorts of things happening, like people connecting to deceased ones, people connecting to different entities, people like kind of being transported in different dimensions and exploring also other aspects of themselves, other aspects of different worlds.
Beautiful.
So yeah, it's very different what can happen, and it's always very interesting to hear the stories of the people afterwards, after their experience.
Okay. So now that you've opened up multidimensionality, um, yeah, let's go. Let's step into that. So sure, we've got the physical form, the physical plane, the 3D plane. Then we've got astral plane, the dream state. Then we've got, other states. In the yogic they talk about the causal, the buddhic, the atmic. We've got there's other levels of consciousness or bodies, or we can describe them in different ways. I'm curious, like, just from a personal perspective, as you've been working with this modality and this practice, how has because what I'm always interested is in people's intuition. Some people, and I think younger people that I meet, some of them just have really, really crystal like high definition clairvoyance, and they can, in terms of their third eye, they can model things. They, when they do visualizations, it's like they're lucid dreaming, and they're, from conversations with different people, lucid dreaming, astral projection, astral travel, like that is part of their experience, and that has been a part of their experience from young to now. For me, that hasn't been the case. Like, I don't see a lot of things, I feel a lot of things. And I guess how I experience it is claircognizance, so a sense of knowing, and that is kind of related to my gut, but it's also related to downloads and just connecting dots, and all of a sudden, like, this one zip file, and poof, everything like makes sense, and all the dots are connecting, all the nodes. But then clairsentient as well. So yeah, just in the body, having like a gut reaction to things. I'm curious for you, how do you experience intuition, and maybe before and after the practice? Because they're muscles. All the different psychic senses are muscles, and we can choose to exercise them. And I imagine the more that you hold space, the more that you expand your spectrum of being able to, I guess, take in this data, this information.
Yeah. So I feel, for me, like, my mom is she's kind of like a medium, but she's not,
Okay.
I mean, not like in an official way. She's not really working with people, but all her senses are how to say, she's very in tune with all of her senses. So she can see things, she can feel things, and all that stuff. So that was something I was influenced by during my whole life.
Wow.
But for a long time, I didn't really have access or like a connection to my own senses or to my own intuition. I mean, I understood the concept, but I didn't really dive into like exploring those kind of things. So during the practice with sounds, of course, it's like a sensibilization to all of those things. And when I started working with the sound baths, I experienced it in a way that I was after my first sound bath, I was knocked out. And not just for a little bit, for 2 or 3 days, literally I couldn't stand up anymore. And I was like, okay, what is happening? And what can I do? What did I do wrong, or what is happening? Yeah. So I was kind of forced to explore like my energy field and everything. I had to really work on like creating this protection for myself so I don't put on a lot of things from people.
Yeah.
And so I started also playing with that during my sound baths. I started playing with, sensing these energies from people and trying it out, like afterwards in the sharing circle, like asking people what they experienced and like kind of proving it to myself that I really sensed it. So for me, I realized that this like sensing things and just feeling things in the environment, it got really strong.
Wow.
And so I really believe that we all have all the senses. We can connect to all the senses, but some are just, more accessible to us and some are less accessible to us. And I really experienced that it depends on so many different things. Like, for example, when I change my environment, when I change the location, there is a different sense that gets activated more. Like, for example, I remember last year in Portugal, suddenly I started seeing a lot of things. Like I had literally had visions. I was camping like on my own and I was about to meet a friend and another friend, and I suddenly get the vision that one of them doesn't show up, and I'm there like I wanted to pick them up, and I'm there and one of them tells me, yeah, the other will not show up. And then I went there and it was exactly the situation that was happening. So that was the first time for me where I also experienced like this sense of kind of knowing beforehand and really seeing this in like visions of what will happen. But again, like for example, since I'm in Bali, this doesn't happen anymore. It's yeah, it really depends on so many different factors what sense that I am more able to use, or where I can like kind of access more. Yeah, I would say.
Thank you for sharing. Like, I really enjoy those topics because, like, I used to read books or just hear other people talk about their senses, and I'm like, oh wow, they're so talented or they're so gifted. And I think for a long time it was almost a little bit of a denial about, what I was able to do. But also it's so easy to be skeptical in this day and age because anything spiritual, anything woo-woo, anything like non-physical, if you can't prove it, you know, through science or through,
Not real.
it's not real. And I've got into some like conversations which I found challenging because our experience is truth, and there's so many different realities that exist, that coexist at the same time. But I guess the matrix, the one that the majority, or even I grew up in, and I guess everyone grew up in, there was a particular narrative and a particular boundaries in which what was approved, what was accepted, what was validated. And I love how you were talking about, you have to test intuition, you have to make a hypothesis, and then when it comes back and it's true, you confirm it, and then it builds you a little bit more confidence, a little bit, it's incremental, and then basically it's learning how to trust. And I think, why not, let's just segue into it. Like, this is feminine energy in the sense that learning how to surrender and learning how to receive. And I think many of us grew up in a world where we're rational, linear, logical, pragmatic, and it's step by step by step. And it's very, there's that sense of, I do something and then I achieve something. Whereas, what I've found as I've kind of like gone more and more into my own spirituality, my own intuition, my own access to that information, that connection, it was really difficult to receive, really difficult to, the mind will just doubt and says, you're crazy, this is fake, you're making it all up.
Yeah.
And that's been such a big challenge for me. And that's why I love talking about this, because I think there's going to be a lot of people who are waking up, and I think it's happening now, but they're going to be going through this, not a crisis, but, you know, they're going to have to reconcile, is my new reality, do I accept it? And, you know, what will that mean in terms of how other people perceive it? Will I be rejected? Will I be ostracized? Will I be called crazy? You know, how is your, I'm curious, you know, we can move on to other stuff, but I'm so curious about how has your journey been in trusting that intuitive flow, those messages, and maybe it's maybe because maybe because if your mum has that access already, maybe you're already predispositioned to that world. So I'm just curious.
Well, I mean, honestly, it was never really easy also with my mom, because there was many people that, were like, okay, what is she talking? And I kind of felt like that the same way. Like for a long time, one of my topics in my life was always like finding kind of like the right people around me where I also feel comfortable to really live out myself. And one part of that is this kind of like intuitive side of myself. And for such a long time in my life, I kind of felt closed off from that. I kind of felt like I had to hide that. And so, of course, if you don't have that openness, or if you don't have that space where you feel comfortable into also exploring this side of yourself, you never get to really tap into the depths and the potentials that there are in terms of intuition and in terms of, like exploring all your senses. And so, yeah, I really felt that going onto my travel journeys, like traveling to different places, really opened up a space for myself where I could also grow more confident within myself, to also allow myself to be that way, and to I mean, I would not say to have those sides to myself, because I feel like we all have that. We all have that. It's not that some people are born with those things and some are not. It's something that we can all work on. It's something that we can all explore and tap into. So, yeah.
It's just the layers, the conditioning and the programs that you get over to be able to accept it. And I think to give yourself permission to feel them, right? And to experience.
Yeah. But in the beginning, I really felt that for me, it was so important to be in the right environment to kind of create this allowance. Later on, for me, I didn't care. I didn't care anymore. Like going into my old circles of friends, and also talking openly about my perceptions and about my beliefs and views around life. And so I think it's important to create this space where kind of like create this space of silence where you get to explore yourself, where you really get to explore your essence and all that comes with it, and that can be the intuition. And then later on, you kind of feel, this strength to just be yourself and live that out in whatever environment that you go to.
Yeah, I guess that authenticity and speaking the truth. Yeah, I guess my experience, like for a long time I struggled to find people, and that's probably why there was like quite a solo path. I imagine in Bali there's a lot of support.
Honestly, that's the best place right now. It's the best place right now, literally. Like wherever you go, people share very similar visions, and they're open to exploring. Like it's this openness that creates playfulness and joy into just exploring whatever sides there are to life. And I honestly, for me, I also have that in my human design, and that's something that I'm still working on. One of the most important things is the environment for me, and that's something I explore now layer by layer even more on what it does to create opening within myself. And Bali is the perfect place for me right now in this moment, because it's so far off from everything that happens in the world right now concerning separation. And like I have this and that point of view, and that's the right view, and that's just the only truth. And You know, like in Austria, where I come from right now, the situation is quite tough. And I have some friends telling me stories. They really feel like if you have a different perspective on things that are happening right now, it's you're being pushed outside of society. You're really being pushed outside of friend circles and stuff like that. So I'm really grateful to be in a place where it's all about, you know, connecting with each other and creating this field together, creating the energy and like supporting each other on our paths. And yeah.
Yeah, such a blessing, and I can imagine like energetically just a very
Yeah.
safe space to learn and to grow and to like, you know, collaborate.
Yeah, because I also feel like when you're constantly in this state of, you know, like doubting and separation and stuff, you never get new inspiration. You're always kind of like, you know, locked into your views. So I feel it's in
Yeah.
Bali, I'm very blessed to get new inspiration and on what life holds. You know, sometimes we just think there is this one path for ourselves and that we have to go, and we don't even see all the other possibilities, and so suddenly they pop up if we have the space,
Yeah, for
like the
sure.
energetic space. How is it in Sydney right now, the situation?
I think Australia is one of like has been one of the harsh ones. I think Canada has been quite harsh as well.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I think yeah, definitely parts of Europe. But yeah, I've found it tricky just because like, you know, you go to India, there's a lot of people in that community, and then you can like connect. I think coming back from India, having that 10 months there, I think I had changed quite a bit. And yeah, it's just like seeing the contrast. It's not judgment, it's just more like, yeah, it's more maybe it's a frequency thing. And I think that's why I set out to create Academy of Transcendence, and we did like an inner city ashram. So I created a space. It was for yoga, meditation, breath work. I was like inviting a few of the healers that I knew, so hypnotherapists, psychics, Reiki, some of them to like it's just a home. You know, it's kind of, yeah, it's what the ashram was in India, where you could go and learn and you can connect and have, yeah, you know, if it's kirtan or if it's satsang, whatever it is, just, you know, it's community. And, you know,
Hmm.
I launched it last year, and then within 3 months, the lockdown happened again. So
So
about,
you launched it when you came back from India?
yeah, I came back
Oh
and then I
wow.
found a space. It's like a warehouse space right in the middle of the city. Don't know if you've been to Sydney yet, but it's in Surrey Hills. So it's like quite a cool area. And it was a beautiful warehouse, and you know, had just ideas of like doing workshops and weekend retreats and just making it really easy for people in the city to, you know, have a taste, have a slice of, you know, some of these modalities, and obviously try to translate it for a city audience. I think that's been quite an important thing for me, because growing up here, just knowing some people have stereotypes or concerns about, you know, these communities, and it's like, it's great that meditation is getting more popular, but, you know, metaphysics, you know, energy centers, you know, the different bodies, like that's all, you know, energy awareness, I think is going to be, you know, way more relevant and important as kind of, you know, as everyone's sensitivity gets
Hmm.
more. You know, we can talk about Schumann resonance, we can talk about, you know, the coronal mass ejections, we can talk about the energetics of the planet rising, and how, you know, us as, you know, these little light vessels are having to adapt and, you know, make different yeah make different, we have to evolve along with the planet. And I think this is like shocking some people into some like very spontaneous, quick awakenings where they experience and they can see, and they, you know, they question things. Um, yeah, so I think energy awareness is something that I'm super interested in, like different levels of consciousness and trying to understand. You know, we come from 3D and it's linear and it's about duality, and then okay, what does 4D, what does 4D mean, what does 5D mean? And it's like, how do we make some of that tangible with real world examples and just know the difference so that we can move and transition between them, because it's so important. We have the option to choose now. You know, like you said, like there is a higher timeline that we can take, and it's always available to us, which is perfect. Now we can talk about timelines.
Yeah, I mean, I especially feel like this year it's so much about just choices and like creating this, like planting this seed in people that everything is just about choices, taking choices. You're just one choice away of literally living your like best version of yourself that you envision for yourself. And I just love that. Like with timeline jumping, it's such an amazing topic.
Tell me about it. So if I was completely, I'm sure you have done this, like the elevator pitch, the spiel. How do you describe, what a timeline is, and maybe talk about some of the theory or the science behind how some of this stuff works from your perspective?
Yeah. So a timeline. So we were with choices. So you are in an intersection and you're about to make a choice. So you can go left or right, and both ways are timelines. And your decision decides on which timeline that you go. And so with timeline jumping, it is not a new concept. It's basically something that we do all the time. What timeline jumping means is that we are shifting from one now moment to another now moment. And that can be like so many things. Literally like moving to a different place can be timeline jumping, because it brings like the change in the environment also creates an internal change. And so it creates a change in your identity. So that's also timeline jumping. So with timeline jumping, the process that I am guiding is, how to describe it best? Let's zoom out a little bit. So we are surrounded by kind of like a vibrational inertia. It's like we create this energy field around us by the construct that we build for ourselves. Like the story that we tell about ourselves creates this energy field.
Mm-hmm.
And so if there is no force from the outside or no decision, let's say, we will always continue to be on the same kind of like vibrational state, on the same timeline, if you want. And so with timeline jumping, with this process, I guide people into, like, we take this timeline, your current reality that you're in, and we move it into a space of void, of nothingness. So you basically dissolve the whole concept about yourself. You dissolve the definition that you have for yourself. And from this place, from this space of nothingness that basically is also everything, you can move into the visualization where you meet a version of yourself, and that again can be anything. That can be a future version of yourself, that can be perceived in like a core essence of yourself, that can be, if you believe in it, a version of yourself that lives in a parallel dimension, a parallel universe, because there is also this theory that says, like all the choices that we make, all the decisions that we make create intersections with, the other intersection living out in another dimension. Mm-hmm. So there is so many forms of yourself, so many versions of yourself that live a different life. And so in this visualization process, you kind of meet yourself and you become aware of all the potential that this higher version of yourself carries, of everything, all the desires that you have to live out in this current life. And so the next step is I guide you really into this vibration. So you really take in this potential and integrate the possibilities. Like you really become aware that what is possible for you. And so you kind of merge with this self, with this higher version of yourself. And then you can bring this into your current state of reality, into your life. And the most important part starts then. People think like, okay, I guide you through a process and then it's over. But the most important part then is to keep working on yourself. Like you have to integrate this, this is kind of like a seed. It's like an inspiration that you get on becoming aware of what is possible for you. But then you have to do the work. You constantly have to remind yourself on this vibration. You constantly have to invite this vibration into your life, because of course change will not happen like instantly, like you wake up and suddenly you're like, I don't know, you attracted all the money that you have, you attracted your new life, you know. But you have to keep working on that. You have to constantly change this vibration around you. And so yeah, that's basically the process that I'm guiding people through. And yeah, there is so many different ways on how you can explore it, what you can explore, and who you can meet in this journey. It's very interesting.
Yeah, amazing. Okay. I think just to flesh out some other bits, like that was such a good kind of overview and introduction. I want to get into some tech. I want to get into some technical things as in, you know, this is one of the reasons I wanted to speak to you, but we're talking about quantum, aren't we? We're talking about the quantum field. We're talking about the ability to we're talking about the universal laws, so law of attraction, frequency. We're basically talking about energy, and you know, going from one state to another state. And you know, yeah, like I've tried different ways to manifest. I've tried different things to call in new things, and you know, some of them have been just from my experience, some of them have been brilliant in just, you know, ripping off some of the like ceilings. I would say it's the ceiling I'd give myself, and I'm like, oh, I can't do that because of that. But any limitation, there's this beautiful, like, if you fight for your limitations, you get to keep them. And so many people that I find when I'm doing my healing work, they're constantly saying, you know, I'll say, what if this? And I say, I can't because of that. And there's this constant, like, people are very used to keeping themselves small. I'm curious, just as a practitioner and through your, yeah, I guess through your experience offering, what are some common like blocks that, you know, people face when they hit this work? Because it's super powerful, and you know, I really, really believe in it. It's sometimes it's just a stretch for people to think, oh, you know, I can change my external world by changing my internal world. A lot of people can't accept that they have that much power, and it's because they've given that power away. So I'm curious, as in, you know, just some insights between around some, you know, you've already given some great like tips around, you know, it's not a quick fix. It's not like a instant change around. It is instant in terms of like consciousness shift. There is still a lag between the energetic and the time space, the physical, and they need to.
I think one important thing that keeps us from, you know, tapping into these things instantaneously is that we so often have this belief that it has to be something difficult in our journey. You know, we always believe we have to do this and that in the outside. Again, like tapping into this topic of feminine and masculine energies. Like we always think we have to have this structure and this fixed, you know, like list of what we have to do in our life in order to manifest things, in order to create the change within our life. So I think one of the most important beliefs to change before tapping into this kind of practices and methods is working on your belief that it has to be hard. I think it's so important to change this into it can be easy, and also creating this, you know, like working on your worthiness, that you are worthy to receive things in an easy way. It can come to you instantaneously. You don't have to do anything. It's going back from this constant need of doing and proving ourselves, you know, like defining ourselves in our outside, defining ourselves by what we are doing, and going back to like this core essence of ourself, like this all comprising field that we all share. And when you're there, you know that you can receive without having to do anything. So I think that's the most important thing to change in order to create change in your life.
That is so good, because like, to make, that I think will resonate for a lot of people, but to get even more granular, hard work pays off. That's a story that we've been sold. Hustle culture, climb your way to the top. It's masculine in the sense of I have to do to achieve, to gain something. And it's, it's for a lot of people, it's counterintuitive to say, I'm going to do nothing and something will come to me. And it's like saying money doesn't grow on trees. Like, there's so many different stories and so much conditioning from society that we've grown up with, and we've been like, what's the word? We've been groomed that way, in the sense of like, that's the way that the
life works. Yeah.
Education system, yes, life, but the education has told us, study really hard to get the marks, and if you get the marks, you get to go to the university, and if you go to the university, you get to go to the job, and when you get to the job, you have to climb the ladder. It's this uphill, you're climbing uphill, and there's step after step after step, and it feels quite linear, and it feels like it's going to take a long time. Some people study for 6 years just to get the qualification to be able to, feel like they're worthy enough to be able to get a junior position into like some firm where they have to work up the ranks. And it really is this deep-seated, like, cultural matrix system. So,
it all comes down to the worthiness, and finding back to the worthiness within ourselves, and that knowing that we are innately worthy to literally receive everything that we want in our life. All the money that we want, all the, material things that we sometimes wish for ourselves, everything, literally everything.
And this is because the world has been operating on scarcity mindset, not prosperity mindset. Yeah. And, this does go back to, I think I saw, I think you were sharing some stuff about Dr. Joe Dispenza. Brilliant, brilliant mind. But he's just, one of the things he says quite often is like, was it neurons that fire together, wire together. So for a lot of people that are older, they're going to have a lot more experience, a lot more, like, some of these neurons have been fried together and galvanized and strengthened and, like, wrapped in so much stuff. So in that, it's, there is, with people younger, there's less of that, years and years of conditioning on the hardening of those belief systems. So, the idea that to break that, for some people, it's going to actually challenge and turn their whole life around, which is brilliant, because it just means that there's so much more opportunities. But I guess what I've experienced in when I work with people and their belief systems, like, some people are ready to let it go, and they have this like really spontaneous thing, but it goes back to what you say, you have to get into a practice. We talked about sadhana before, and what's your daily rituals? How do you speak to yourself? How do you wake up? How do you set yourself up for the day? And like, life can be, it's not even like life is spiritual, because, like, okay, let's talk about spirituality for a second. What does spirituality mean to you?
So for me, a long time I thought, it's this spirituality for me is defined by all those practices that you can do and all those tools that you can accumulate for yourself. But honestly, for me, spirituality is such a broad thing. It literally is everything that I can do and experience in order to, how to find the word in English now, to bring joy for my spirit.
Beautiful.
It can be anything.
I love that.
There can be anything. That doesn't have to be those things that we kind of connect to spirituality. That can be very simple things. That can be just, I don't know, staring at the sunset, taking a bath in the ocean. That can be like caring for your plants. It can be literally everything. There is no limitations to spirituality for me.
And this is so great to talk about this, because as people who are sharing our own versions of spirituality, what spirituality means to you. I'm not sure about you, but like for me, there was a lot of imposter syndrome about, the traditional understanding of spirituality was that, you have certain masters, you have, gurus, you have yogis, you have the people that have spent times in meditating 50 years in a cave, or that have, born in a monastery and have really like grown up with a practice which have kept them. And one of the really liberating things that I observe about, I don't even know if you'd call it New Age. I think it's post-New Age. Like New Age, I feel like was the last 20, 50 years. But right now, and I'm also curious to see what's going on in Bali. But, having an access to spirituality in India, in the Vedas, the Bhagavad Gita, all these really beautiful texts that go from a long way. And at that particular time, it is still relevant. There's still gems and insights in it. But, people like Buddha, people like Jesus, people who have come in to have influence at certain time space, realities, they do to translate some of this universal, I guess, sacred knowledge in a language and in a language that people can digest and people it's relevant to. And for example, you go to India and it's easier to meditate, I find. Well, first of all, energetically, being in the Himalayas is pretty incredible.
Yeah.
Bringing that into society where, when I landed in Australia again, I was like, oh, I can feel the energy of consumerism. I can feel the energy of like hustle culture. I can feel the energy of like politics. And there's nothing wrong with that, because that's beautiful. And that can be it is spiritual, because everything is spiritual. Everything has a spiritual essence.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm asking you is, post New Age, some of the language, we've got light workers, we've got starseeds, we've got walk-ins, we've got 5D consciousness, we've got there is this whole world bursting out with quite new terminology. And even if you take what is like the vernacular, what's circulating now through the communication channels that we have, and if you bring that to India, they might have a different way of talking about it. But when I talk to some of my yoga teachers, they're saying this doesn't fit. You have to, do pranayama for like 10 years before you can get the cities, the superpowers to be able to do clairvoyance or to do whatever. But if you follow any of the New Age or post New Age people, they're saying, there's people that are, I think you know what I mean. I'm curious, in Bali, like what's the scene like? Like what are people talking about, and how much of it is rooted in tradition? Because Bali is very indigenous, and it's obviously the communities and the indigenous the cultures there. Then it attracts a lot of people from the yogic traditions and the I think the Indian. And then obviously you've got this very New Age, very modern, I find it very new, the language and the terms that you're using, and also the concepts, like 5D, for example. I'm curious, like what's the mix like, and how is it all mashing together?
Very interesting question. Yeah, I think for this question, I have to go back to how it all started in Bali. So I'm in Ubud right now, and I feel like that's kind of like the epicenter of spirituality, if you want to call it like this. Like Ubud translated means medicine. And you can really feel like this special vibe to it. People, like local people, it's very important for them to still practice all the traditions. Like Bali is, like the Balinese people, for them ceremony is something so important. Throughout the day, a couple of times, they are always going into like a ceremonial small space at home. They kind of have these offerings, that have like flowers and incense and all those stuff that they give to their gods. So there is a very strong tradition, very strong old tradition. And I think that tradition and that kind of uniqueness, because essentially that's something very unique. Nowhere in the world it is like this, in Bali. There is no place that has these traditions and customs. It's very unique. So I think this fact brought a lot of spiritual people or spiritually interested people to Bali, and that's how like a new community formed. And so I feel like in this community that I live in right now, I'm very like fortunate, and I'm very grateful that I live in right now. But sometimes I also feel like they are not paying enough, how to say, they are not giving enough attribute to the old traditions here or to the locals anymore, because it's a community that has been formed on its own, like the whole yoga, breathwork community and stuff like that. It's a new form of community. And so yeah, sometimes it's very beautiful. It gives you so much inspiration, but sometimes I also feel like maybe it can be even more imbalanced. Maybe it can be even more like working together, with locals. And yeah, it depends strongly where you are. For example, right now I'm living in the south, and it really feels like it's a neutral space. It's not really a lot of traditions anymore, and but more like this new and modern spiritual approach and spiritual community. So yeah, it can be both sides. Like here in Ubud, for example, it's totally different. People like, Westerners and locals live together, and it's very much still about the traditions. But in other places in the island, this spark gets lost a little bit, I feel like. So yeah, it's difficult, I
Yeah,
think.
that's so interesting because yeah, it's almost like a lot of the indigenous cultures understand, a lot of the ancient wisdom traditions understand these cycles of time. The yogic tradition, we've got the yugas, and these big passages of time that change our perspective from like this very egoistic, this is the only lifetime, which is a perfect segue into death. But and then but these passages of time. So the at the moment, like Australia is an interesting place because from my understandings, from my research, and this is, I don't know if this has been validated, but this is just from what I've read and watched. But that the indigenous Australians, the Aborigines, they came down 26,000 years or something ridiculous, like a very, probably longer than that, 26, I think there's yugas, I don't know, I'm like 56 or 76,000, something ridiculous, a long time of years that they've inhabited like the mainland. And from what I understand about looking into ancient civilizations, they were they moved down from Atlantis, and through some of the islands like Papua New Guinea and all around Southeast Asia, Thailand, Malaysia, and obviously Indonesia. So I don't, their ability to like have stories passed down, like if it's like orally, or if it's been recorded in any texts. But it's not that it's interesting to compare, but we've got what Westerners understand as spirituality, and for a lot of people that has come from, I don't know, colonization has done a lot in terms of like coming to different countries and saying, okay, this is going to be a place where you have a church now. And like Polynesia, for example, I think recently I went to Fiji, and it was interesting to see, like, just to see how some of these more indigenous communities have had, I guess the parallel I'm making is that's kind of what happened in Australia. Very differently in New Zealand, which is very close by. I think they really reached a peace treaty earlier. So there's so much more artifacts in New Zealand which record their traditions and their spirituality, their connection to the nature. I think, yeah, I really find it interesting because even I live in Australia and I wouldn't know how to connect to the indigenous community to be able to understand and to start to witness. I could probably do more. I do see people in other parts of Australia like getting involved in like corroborees and like, you know, ceremony, but I completely agree with you. Like, how can, you know, the wisdom and, you know, yeah, the tradition of that, how can we take what we're learning on Instagram and YouTube and, you know, these really modern ways of accessing information, which some of them are just coming straight from, you know, somewhere else. How can we merge this with, you know, the traditions that have been upheld for a long time? And it's not to say that they need updating, because you know, they might have a different word for what another experience is. But this is probably one of the most interesting things I'm finding, is that, you know, I can take in as much from the yogic tradition, I can take in as much from the Buddhist, even esoteric stuff like theosophy or, you know, Kabbalah. Like, there's so many different schools of like how things, how people interpret, you know, I think in theosophy they call it one truth, many paths. And I really resonate with that because, you know, before globalization, everyone's kind of in their own pocket of the world and they have their own way to articulate the creation story and their own way to connect to the archetypes, the archetypal energies of the planets and of nature, the seasons. Yeah, I think what I'm trying to say is that there is there is a record of people and communities and cultures that speak about spirituality up until a point, but and that's, there's so much reverence and sacredness in that, and not to discredit that whatsoever, but it feels like there's this whole other expansive, multidimensional, but also it's like the cosmos is expanding. And what some, you know, the Hopi or the different tribes have talked about, you know, this death and this rebirth of the planet and this next kind of cycle that we're going through. But yeah, do you have any, that was, it wasn't a question, it was just an observation, because you know, the idea that planet Earth is going to become a, you know, galactic, you know, open up to the galactic, become a galactic civilization is a mind-blowing. And it's not that crazy when we look at the other traditions, because we see spaceships and we see different creatures, so you can almost kind of like make some connections. But I'm curious to say, like, you know, I think the Balinese and even your experiences traveling, how do you think this new version of spirituality, this new information, kind of starts to change the landscape? Or if it doesn't change it, how do we get more unity through it?
Well, that's a tough one. I feel like, because you said this new information, first of all, in my perception, I feel it's not a new information, it's just like differently interpreted.
Okay, cool.
I think, yeah, we can learn so much about these traditions. They can be inspiration for us. And if you go, like, you know, when we talk about religions, for example, you can go to so many different religions and, you know, look at the structure, and in essence, they all say the same. It's all the same essence. And I feel like it's the same with all these new spiritual approaches, with these new spiritual teachings. It's always the same. It all comes down like from the same source, but it's just a different interpretation. And how we can bring this together is a good question. I don't know if we have to bring it even together. Like, I think they can coexist. I think the most important part is that we pay respect to all the different traditions. You know, for example, here in Bali, I feel like the least we can do is, when we come here, open ourselves up to what is present, open ourselves up to all these energies, to their beliefs, to what Balinese people really believe in, what is their belief system, what are their gods, what are their traditions, what is their ceremony, what are they doing? Because you cannot just come here and ignore the whole stuff. It's like, I feel the least we can do is open ourselves up and just pay respect to it by showing this interest and being open to it. And I think that's the most important thing, rather than having to merge it all together, like I think they can all coexist. And of course those kind of traditions have maybe like a little bit more of an older approach, but it can also be like, we all need something different. And I feel, this again depends on so many different things, on energies, on location, on how we grow up, on our culture and stuff like that. So I feel like every one of us needs different things, needs different influences and inspiration. So I feel it all has a greater meaning. So we are being born into where we are being born into, and having these influences through more modern approaches, because in our process of, like experiencing ourselves, and maybe if you want to call it ascension process, we maybe need more this kind of teachings at this moment. But it can be that, people here, for example, they need this kind of approach. So I feel it can all coexist. And yeah.
That's perfect. I think what you've done with that answer is just got to the core of, I think, where we're heading, which is not about like the being the same. It's not about this homogenizing of everyone into one, one narrative, one belief. It's this unity in diversity, and the ability to accept everyone where they're at without trying to change, without trying to control. So yeah, that was a very elegant way to articulate. Just
Sometimes it's hard for me to articulate it in English, since English is not my mother tongue. I'm sometimes struggling with things that are inside of me that want to come out, but finding the right words in English. So I hope it's also
I
easy
think
to
you
follow.
did a great job. And I think it does allow, that approach allows us to take back and not get too lost in certain communities and certain ways that people are talking. And I think it just comes back to love, doesn't it?
Yeah, it all comes down to love.
Okay. So if it's okay with you, let's just do the last topic. I don't know how much time we've gone through, but so talk to me about death.
Nice way to approach it. Where to start with death?
What was your relationship with it before, and how has that changed, maybe?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm just thinking back on my first encounter of death. I think it was when my grandfather died. Probably I was at the age of 7 or 8. That was my first encounter with death. He died at home. It was still like him dying at home, and I also kind of experienced like everybody saying goodbye to him and stuff like that. It all felt very natural to me. I never had the feeling, there is something off, or there needs to be something hidden, or I don't know. It felt very natural. And I remember even the funeral was super funny, because I remember my mom being pregnant, and when you say goodbye to the body, you kind of throw some part of soil or flour into the grave. Yep. And so my mom wanted to do that, and she was highly pregnant, and she got stuck between two tombstones. So she kind of started laughing, and my aunt started laughing, the priest started laughing. So it was this very it was a weird situation, but also kind of funny, so that's how I perceived death. For me, it was just something very, very natural. There was also an open casket where I got to see the dead body, and I never thought, whoa, this is something weird, or something that I should not approach as a child. It felt supernatural. And so this was my first encounter with death, and something that I kept within myself, like how I viewed death was kind of like, you know, very, very casual, very natural, something that is just part of who we are being. But it changed a little bit when I was 15, when one of my best friends died. He committed suicide, and yeah, it was a story. It was a weird story where before he died, he kind of called me, but he didn't really, you know, dial through. So I was the first person that the police kind of called in the morning, and they wanted to talk to me. What happened? What did he say before? And I didn't know anything about that. I didn't know that he committed suicide. And by this time, in this age, I wasn't able to, yeah, to see this from a neutral perspective. I really blamed myself that I couldn't save him, and this accompanied me for many years. It was a very hard process, a very deep process of grief. I didn't know how to navigate through. I didn't really have anything or anyone in the environment and guided me through this stage of grieving. And yeah, I really tried to numb myself. I was drinking a lot by that time. I was just numbing myself to not having to feel the pain, but also at the same time kind of, I don't know, wanting to have a way to connect with this person again, gaining clarity for myself. And what really helped me in that way was when I had my first experience with a medium. By that time, I think it was also, I was 19 maybe or something.
Right.
I didn't know if I should believe in this. I didn't know anything about it, but I just wanted to try it because I was very desperate to kind of resolve all this grief.
Yeah.
And so she connected with his soul, and she, for the first time in my life, I heard that she told me that when you transition, when a body or when a soul transitions, they can be in this in between state that is, you know, in between dimensions. And the soul can be super confused whether they want to transition to this plane or there's still something unresolved in the physical world that we just know. And sometimes we just, you know, want to hold on to those things that we know as a soul that is dying. And so he was being in this state and was being super confused. And she helped him transition. And she also, I don't remember exactly what she said, but I remember that she told me things that only me and him could know. So that was really like, okay, this is really possible. And it really helped me resolve the whole thing, the whole grief and the whole experience and the whole blaming myself. And so from this time on, it also shifted a little bit my point of view on death, because I really developed this kind of death anxiety that got to a point that when I started to think about death, I couldn't breathe anymore. I couldn't sleep. I got into this state of deep distress. And so naturally I started to pull everything away concerning death. I didn't want to be in this situation anymore where, you know, I have to relive this stress. So I really tried to avoid everything around death until the point where I was forced to view death again. And that was the point where my sister was diagnosed with breast cancer. And yeah, it was a very, very tough journey, because my sister and me, we were always super connected. Like, people, when we grew up, thought we were twins, and that's also how it felt energetically, like we were as souls super connected. For me, it always felt like we had a soul contract. So that was really the point where I felt like, okay, I was being forced to completely change my point of view on death again. And so the whole journey, it was a very long healing journey, just to make it short. It was a very long healing journey, and there were so many moments where I thought she was dying, that were all kind of like puzzle pieces that prepared me really for her death. And so her whole death and the whole process of navigating through the grief of the death of my sister again really changed everything for me in how I view death. I cannot even describe it. I think there is so much opening that I feel when I tune into this whole process. People sometimes feel it's weird how I see it, because I don't only see it as something negative, as something, that I lost my sister, but as weird as it sounds, I also see it as a very, very big gift. And it helped me change so many perspectives in my life. It helped me to create closer and intimate relationships with my friends, with my family, with strangers that I met on my journey. It helped me to change the awareness of my own strength, of how I navigate through things, of how I navigate through internal processes, of how I navigate through grief. And yeah, also, of course, it comes with the reflection of how I perceive life. And it also gave me the opportunity again to appreciate life more and think about, what I really want in my life. What do I want to invite in my life? Do I really want to keep living, this life that I think I have to live? Do I really want to stay stuck in those structures that I built for myself? Or do I want to now take responsibility for myself, for my life, and make
Yeah,
actions?
choose.
Yeah.
This makes sense about the timeline jumping.
Yeah.
This awareness of impermanence, this non-attachment, this gratitude.
Mm.
Right, that,
It all
yeah,
is super connected and intertwined.
yeah, I can see the gift and how it connects.
Mm.
Really
Yeah.
beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. That was a really, yeah, it was easy. Like, it was lovely to connect to that way of seeing the world and what that taught you. So yeah, thank you.
Mm. I would also love to know how you perceive death.
Okay, awesome. I think like most people, I grew up, yeah, Western. I think my parents were war refugees from the Vietnam War. So they left in the middle of the war and they jumped on fishing boats to travel to Indonesia, actually, and Malaysia. Just jumped on a boat because of the change of power. And, the country just wasn't, they made the decision the country wasn't worth living in. They'd rather just try find another life somewhere else. So my perspective on death actually came from, like, it was, I think, colored by my parents' relationship to fear, because obviously a war, about dying, it can be about dying, but also the I guess the risk of going on this boat, going out into water and not knowing if your boat can actually make it. These weren't real boats, these were fishing boats. They were like, they weren't
Wow.
made for the seas. And what I'd ask my mom and my dad about this, and they'd say that sometimes you go out and then you meet a pirate, like pirates that are waiting on there, and they'd come onto the boat and they would take money, they would take jewels, whatever jewelry, and at sometimes they would rape people. So I think this is why part of my work is related to trauma, generational trauma, and also like how, consciously or unconsciously, most of the time unconsciously, like belief systems are passed down through, the ways that society, our family, our communities perceive the world. And this is about perception. So my parents came to Australia, they didn't know English, they had to learn English, they had to, build a life, and it was about survival mode. So very much in this, we need to work really hard to make the money to kind of feed the kids. And, this was their, I feel like this is their area, it was survival. And for, when you're in that state of consciousness, you are up against, I think there's two major influences: fear, safety. Fear and safety are related. And then, this idea that to survive, to stay alive, to stay alive financially, emotionally, you know, whatever it is, to stay alive, you know, because there's different types of death, isn't there? But, you know, this idea of mortality, when we're disconnect, like I think Buddhism is, you know, Buddhist tradition is connected, you know, they have the ideas of reincarnation, but I don't think my parents really brought that with them over. I think they were very much disenfranchised, like kind of upheaval, like almost like shaken up by the war. So a lot of those traditions, yeah, like the priority was food, shelter, and safety. So in that adversity, and as they landed in Australia, they had to make ends meet. And many of them, I think many of the Vietnamese migrants at the time didn't have the support net, the education, the support structures to actually process emotions. So, you know, the amount of trauma that they experienced, you know, when they're seeing dead bodies, when they're, you know, worrying, constant anxiety, and obviously going through, you know, some journeys around, you know, around the world and not knowing if they can like reconnect with family. There's a lot of trauma that's accumulated in those kind of really, you know, that's big trauma, big T trauma events. And I think as part of that, you know, I grew up in a family where it was about survival. It was about, you know, toughen up, and, you know, emotional regulation wasn't really a thing. Communication wasn't really a thing. So from my perspective, I was modeled, this is the priority, get food on the table, pay the bills, keep the family alive. And, you know, when it came to things like, oh, art or creativity, or when it came to like intuition or anything, or when it came to sensitivity, and I think I was a pretty sensitive kid in terms of like being an empath. I'm a Cancerian with a Pisces moon, so I've got a lot of water in my astrology. There was no space for it in that family and in that upbringing, and particularly being a guy in Sydney. It's, you know, Australian culture is a lot more like, you know, there's a masculine aspect to it. So a lot of my journey has been about like redefining a new type of male, a guy that is, you know, creative, artistic, emotional, intuitive, spiritual. And through that path of just saying, this is my nature, this is what I gravitate towards, this is how I want to express myself, this is my authentic expression. Like death was related to fear and survival. I think like most people, it's just my mom was scared about everything. Well, my mom like worried about, I guess many parents worry about things, but she was more heightened in her worry because of what she'd been through. So she was like, you know, take every single precaution so that you're safe. Safety was a very big theme for her. Obviously, it makes sense, you know, having gone through that experience. So, you know, as you know, me and my brother and sister being born in Sydney, we don't have that history, but we have the influence of, we need to be careful. We need to, you know, make sure that we look both ways before we cross the road. We need to make sure that, you know, we don't get sick in this way, because if not, something could happen. And my mum was always like, something could happen. And I think there's this fear for the worst. There is this pessimism. There is this, it's scarcity mindset, but it's also this, death is the worst thing in the world. So that's the history of what I kind of absorbed through osmosis. And it makes sense. And, you know, there's no judgment of that. That's just kind of my experience. But what I loved, I think, when I started doing my own seeking, starting to kind of make my own understanding of the world, you know, I loved astrology. I don't know why. I'm not an astrologer, but I love the idea of astrology. And you know, one of the first things, like one of the really pivotal things I read at the very start of my like spiritual, inquiry, spiritual curiosity, was Kabbalistic astrology. And, you know, it was a beautiful like bit of writing which talked about, you know, these souls that were, you know, starting to like plan their lifetime on Earth. And I was like, what? That's crazy. It's like we're in a video game. It's nuts. Like,
Is that what we're doing?
is that what we're doing? And they were basically saying, you're going to go through this up and down to learn this, and this is what your intention is, and you're going to have these attributes of personality, and these are your, and this is how the different archetypal energies infuse into you to give you the gifts and also the weaknesses so that you can use planet Earth as a school for learning. And for me, like, that really spoke to my soul in the sense that it didn't, like, I was like, I hope that's what's happening, because it's so empowering to think that we're not just limited to one lifetime, that, there is an accumulation of experience and that there's upward spiral of evolution, so that, and some people I talk to, they're saying, no one knows what's happening after death. And, I would challenge that, because there are some, I think when I started to look into it, I was like looking at researchers like Peter Fenwick, who he talks about near-death. He researched near-death experiences and heart attacks and life, and when people have out-of-body experiences, when they have heart attack or whatever, they meet their guides, they meet these beings of light, and they have these life reviews, and they're like, well, do you want to go back or do you want to stay here? And those experiences really blew my mind, because again, it just started to validate, or it gave more data to this idea that the seed of possibility of maybe we're not limited to this physical body, and there is a soul, eternal soul, that we can connect to. And even more when I hear more people talking about it, like, yeah, and Dr. Joe Dispenza is incredible again, in the sense that he's like, you can go forwards or backwards, we're not we're not
limited. Yeah,
everything is like parallel. It doesn't, time is one expression of how we experience reality, and it's important to be able to have that level of separation, to be able to slow things down, because if everything was happening at the same time, there'd be overload, and like we'd have access to everything. So I don't think we'd be able to like sip the coffee very slowly, if you drink coffee, or be able to watch the sunset, or have the really, and this is why, like, it's a blessing to be here and to experience time in this linear way, and even more empowering to be able to say, okay, I'm having this experience. Is it my highest joy or not? And how can I imagine something even like more luscious, more juicy, more, more blissful. So that piece of writing, which I might even just link it to the video when we post it, but it really just blew my mind away, because it took the perspective of souls who are trying to learn something on this school of planet Earth, and it just made everything, it just gave me a sense of peace, because I'm like, everything's okay, everything's scripted in some ways. Yes, we do have free will, but there is a version of ourselves, a higher version of ourselves, a loving version of ourselves, that wants us to go through obstacles, so that they can, they act as a catalyst for us to experience polarity. And this is what this is, again, is about time space, and it's about polarity. And the way that we learn about love is to experience absence of love.
I really love like this concept of a soul path. As you said, it gives us the opportunity to create more trust into what happens in our life, and to also shift the perspective from always having the urge to have everything under control, into developing more equanimity in our lives. If and if you trust that your soul chose this path for you, and with every obstacle as well that we experience in our life, and with every challenge that we experience in our life, you chose that. I think you can create so much trust, and that's what also really helped me a lot in my grieving process with my sister. Changing from why did that happen? Why my sister? To it was her choice. It was probably the choice of her soul. And I respect that. It doesn't help me if I grieve something that cannot be, it's holding, it's this urge of holding on. And it's really like paying respect to her and to the path that she chose. And that's what really, really helped me a lot in my grief journey.
That's so, like, that is really, really beautiful, in the sense that you honor someone else's journey.
Yeah.
And I think in the society that we grew up in, controlling what other people do or think, what they should do, having a really like judgment really, and saying, you know, you are obliged to do this, guilt, shame, you know, act in these certain ways. There is this like, you know, it's like you've overstepped your, like there is this breach of their sovereignty, their ability to choose, and that is what's in alignment for them. And even if you, and you know, even doing healing, we can't give people the answer because it takes away the opportunity for them to really integrate and land it. If they get to that conclusion themselves, they have the shift, they have the full embodiment and the integration of it. So, you know, there is this, you know, the more you work with people that are dealing with traumas, that are on their journey, the more that you can respect that their choices are the, you know, yeah, it's in their highest good, even if that looks like it's a mess.
Yeah.
And
I mean, rationally, sometimes it just doesn't make sense.
yeah,
Like, yeah, I mean, for me as well, like when my sister died, she rationally, she was also like, I feel her soul journey on this earth, rationally, she was trying to hold on to what she wanted to do in her life, which still was unresolved. But on a soul level, I feel like she always knew on her healing journey that this is her path. So it's hard, like, to keep this balance of, you know, like us always trying to wanting to understand things on a rational base, and things having to make sense, and feeling this truth within ourselves. Because I mean, obviously, this concept of the soul plan, the soul blueprint, it's nothing that we will have proof of. But again, it's this tuning into what feels right for you. And as you said, it spoke to your soul. When I tune into this, for me, this is totally the truth. This is like, it can't be different. It's, yeah.
and I think what will help is more people talking about it. So I think this is why I really like, you know, I really support being an advocate of, you know, death positivity, and you know, just being death positive and having this out in the open, because then people will be more inclined to, you know, reach out to a medium and, you know, have that experience and that validation. And, you know, if reincarnation was talked about more, and if, you know, if these other realities, which are usually like labeled and, you know, just called woo-woo or crazy or just intangible, yeah, the metaphysical, like validating the metaphysical world without the need to prove it, but to experience it. The more people that experience it, you know, individually, the more collectively we can accept it, and that we can, you know, remove some of this fear. And, you know, there's a lot of fear around mortality, you know, just generally, I think, you know. So yeah, I think your experiences with your sister and your friend, like, it makes a lot of sense how your, you know, that relationship has changed and that's shifted. And yeah, it's really beautiful to see you translating that perspective and that insight into your work and your offerings.
But obviously, it's not something that has to, you know, that everybody has to experience, so that we come to a point where we start reflecting death. You know, that's one thing. Like, don't always wait until the point where you're confronted with death to reflect death. I think that's a very essential thing, that, in my opinion, it should be something that we learn in school, something that we discuss and reflect in school, because it is a natural part within our being. It's not this view that we have that there is life and there is death. You know, it's like intertwined, and it's a part of ourselves, and we need to start reflecting that, and we can invite so much more quality into our life if we do that. Like, people sometimes think, if I start reflecting death, I kind of invite that. You know, I don't want to die, I don't want to reflect death, I don't want to talk about it. But it's really the opposite way around. There is even scientific studies that say that when you reflect death regularly, there is mechanisms in our brain that, you know, in the moment where you reflect death, this automatic organism starts, and it brings you kind of like the feeling of joy. it's so I think it's super important, and also some kind of traditions prove this concept. Like in Bhutan, it's a part of their tradition that they reflect upon death at least 5 times a day. I think that this is so interesting because I mean Bhutan is the
Happiest place, yeah.
it's called the happiest place in the earth, yes, and part of their happiness construct and how they teach people to create more happiness in their life is the reflection upon death. So I think that really proves that, yeah, we should really acknowledge it, reflect upon it, and accept it as something natural in our
Yeah,
being.
I think one extension on that is to celebrate it, like Day of the Dead in, is it Mexico? Even like the way that different cultures do funerals, you know, in the West it's black, it's about, you know,
Yeah.
commiserating and like, you know, paying respects, sure, but in India there's I think there's celebration. I don't know if
Yeah.
but it's like
In
celebrate,
Varanasi.
it's about celebrate life as
Yeah.
opposed to mourn the death. It's like, yeah, celebrate a life that was worth, you know, that was like beautifully led. um
That's why I love the death positive movement, because it also shifts the perspective around funerals. And there is, for example, this movement right now happening with, I don't know if you've heard it, living funerals. An absolute fan of this concept where, you know, if people know that they're going to die, they're meeting up with the person and celebrating this person while they're still
wow,
alive. And
that's
I
beautiful.
love this concept because it brings you together. You know, there is not this separation that is being created with, you know, we are staying here on this physical plane and you are going and you have to go through this process on your own because we are not there, right? You know, but it creates this space together where you can talk about all those things, where you can talk about visions that you have for death, where you can, yeah, essentially create more connection and intimacy within the people that are meeting up and with the person that is going to die. And I absolutely love that, to celebrate this person while they're still alive.
Yeah.
I love that. And there is so much shifting around funerals. I mean, it's a whole topic by itself, but I love that we're shifting from this concept of just, you know, grieving and this fixed structure to something that we can create. We can be, you know, super creative in hosting the funeral. And that's why it's also important to talk about with your friends and family what you wish for your funeral, because you can literally have everything in your funeral. You know, you can have your favorite DJ playing if you want that.
Yeah,
Or, you know, I don't know, there are
like
so many artistic ways and approaches that you can also put into like the frame of a funeral.
yeah, it's like the opportunity to throw a party for the people you love as you say, kind of wave goodbye. There's
Yeah,
one thing that
yeah.
came through to me just now is that it seems like you've probably heard about it, but rebirthing as rituals, you know, the way that I've seen it done is people go to the beach or wherever and then they bury themselves and they come back out, and you know, in that ritual they leave behind a version of themselves, either an identity or qualities or fears, but yeah, like, you know, going through that. And similarly, like, you know, trauma from the womb as the baby comes out, and you know what's taken there. So it's super interesting because, you know, birth and death is just, you know, it's on a continuum, like that you can't have one without the other. But these little transition states of like coming into the body, which apparently is a really traumatic experience, like this big soul, like whatever experience, and then fitting down into this like baby that can't move and can't
Yeah.
speak. It's super vulnerable. And apparently, I think it's Ram Dass who says that death is the beautiful thing. It's like taking off a tight shoe, and it's just like this
Yeah,
relief.
I love that.
It's just this
Yeah,
beautiful
it's like
thing.
an opening that is being created. Death is like a portal where we are being invited into, yeah, this opening situation. I think it's not something that, you know, like we are dying and then you're limited because you don't have this physical form anymore. It's an opening, it's an expansion. Because
And
I recently talked to a friend about this, like also the connection between meditation and dying. And I feel there is not a connection, because I feel it's the same. It's like, you know, when we're dying, it's like when we are going into meditation, not this, focused meditation where you focus on your breath, but more like this unfocused meditation where you slowly dissolve this feeling of your physicality and expand your awareness. And for me, it always feels like, there is the world, and then there is like this hologram of energetics, and it's not like limited to the hologram of the world, but of the whole cosmos. So I feel when we let go of this physical part, we are kind of transcending into this whole new world. And by shedding this layer of the physical, our awareness of the other layers expand. So there is this infinite expansion happening. And I think, something that we all can look forward to instead of being afraid.
Yeah, I love that. I think that was such a beautiful way to wrap up this conversation, and particularly about death. I think that what the yogic tradition says, absorption, samadhi, dissolving into this wider collective awareness, unity awareness. But I that was beautiful. There was so many gems and so much so much great insights and perspectives, and really nice to hear your story.
Thank you also so much for your perspectives.
Yeah.
And for the invitation in general. I'm happy that we made it.
Yeah, definitely. Is there anything else that you want to say? Anything you want to just, it's almost like a show bag or a gift to leave for anyone that listens, anyone that's got this far. Anything that you want to share, any key any offering of an invitation or a new perspective or something that you
I think I would just love to state the invitation, really get into action, meet up with your friends, meet up with your family, and start talking about death. Start to reflect on your spiritual legacy. How do you envision your death? Who do you want to be with when you die? What do you want to have around you? Which environment do you want to be in? What kind of things do you want to have? Do you want to have music? Do you want to have poetry? Do you want someone to read? Really get into the space with friends or family to reflect on how your death should look like, and also how your funeral should look like. Do you want to be buried? Do you want to be cremated? Is there some more creative way that you want to put into this process? But really get into this place of talking about it, because the invitation, of course, we get it often if we engage with this death positive movement. But okay, where do I start? So I really invite you to just get together with friends and just start the conversation. And out of that, I think there is really beautiful inspirations that we can get to know each other on such a different level if we talk about death. So I really wish that people start talking about it.
Yeah, I think the beautiful byproduct of talking about death is that automatically it asks us, how do we choose to live?
Yeah. It forces us to think about our meaning and what we connect with meaning. How does meaning feel for us in our life? What does meaning mean? What is it?
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful thing. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. I love that. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much. It's been
Thank you.
super expansive, connected, transmission, interaction. I'm super tell some people, how do they experience what you have to offer? People in Sydney, or there's some people overseas that kind of that we're connected to through Academy of Transcendence. How do people find you? like we'll add some links, but I'll give you a little ability to, talk about what you have to offer.
So if you want to connect in person, please come to Bali.
Yep.
There you can also experience my sound offerings. I currently only do my sound offerings in person, but if you want to go through the process of timeline jumping, I also do that online. So people just connect with me on Instagram. And yeah, you can also find some more information on this process on my website, beyondknowing.co. And yeah, just reach out. I always love to get into the conversation and hear about the stories of how people see death and what are their experiences with death. So just reach out. I would love that.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing you talk more about death. Like, you're very articulate and very grounded and very compassionate in the way you talk about it. So yeah, please keep talking about it, and keep sharing what you do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kevin, for giving this platform to talk about those very important topics.
You're very
And thank you also for your reflections. I love your work. Like, I love that you also set up this community space in times of a pandemic. I think it's so important that we also create these spaces, where we get to connect in this way. So I also really appreciate it.
Yeah.
At some point I come visit your space.
You're very welcome. I'm keen to get to Bali soon, so
please come.
I probably will get to Bali before you. Australia's.
Is it possible for you to travel right now? Yeah.
I think it's opening up next month, so I think I will be able to move around. But it's been closed. The borders have been closed for like 2 years almost. So
yeah,
let
me know. Let me know. I pick you up from the airport.
That'd be beautiful. I love that. Okay. Thank you so much. I'm gonna let you go. Thank you so much for your time and your energy and
Thank you so much.
We'll
beautiful to connect.
Okay. See you.
Have a beautiful evening. Bye.